Welcome, everyone. My name is Andreas Graf, and I'm a Senior Associate for EU Energy Policy at Agora Energiewende. I have the pleasure of moderating this event today, Harnessing the Potential of Energy Management and District Heating in REPowerEU. We're off to a slightly late start, but nonetheless, I'm sure we'll catch up in a couple of minutes. And let me get right to it. A brief overview of what we want to do today. So we will start with some opening remarks by the European Commission to set the scene on the contribution of these technologies and the wider context of REPowerEU. And then we will have some opening presentations from representatives, and we have a great panel here today of the energy efficiency services industry, the solar heating industry, and the district energy industry. And we will follow up with a panel discussion. And at the end, we will, of course, bring in you, the audience, here to discuss with us in a Q&A session. For that, there is Slido available to contribute questions to the discussion. There should be a QR code here up on the screen. You should also be able to see it online. Please use the QR code to access Slido and contribute your questions. We'll be taking them throughout the session. So with that, let's go right to our opening speaker. Hans van Steen has a great title. It's Principal Advisor for the Integrated Renewable Energy Strategy for 2050. And he is, let's say, one of the brains in the European Commission thinking ahead towards an integrated energy strategy for Europe. And is also in a great position to comment on exactly the contribution of these industries in the context of REPowerEU. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Andreas, and a warm welcome and good morning also from my side. I'm really very pleased to be here today to discuss this really key topic for us in the Commission. I've been asked to set the scene a little bit, try and paint the bigger picture, and I'm sure most of you will know it, but maybe just to quickly recap, the way we see it in the Commission is that we are actually currently facing a triple challenge in energy. We're obviously facing the climate change challenge. This has been with us for some time now. We know we need to act now. The window is closing. We've seen very serious climate change happening around the world, including in Europe. And we know if we want to avoid catastrophic climate change, that the clock is ticking and very little time remains. Secondly, we're in a security of supply crisis. We are actually this year, for the first time in I would almost say living memory, looking into a winter where there is uncertainty as to whether or not we will actually have sufficient energy to cover our needs in Europe. This calls for extraordinary measures. We in the Commission are looking at those, and if we have time, we can also discuss a little bit about those. And then the third challenge, or crisis if you want, is the affordability crisis, with energy prices skyrocketing over the last almost 1 year. I would say very surprising to most people, but in fact, meaning that there is now a lot of people who are struggling. And of course, this has now risen to the very top of the political agenda and is, I would say, a top priority for most politicians in Europe to see how can we actually now try and bring energy prices down to a level where it is more manageable for both households and businesses. So that's the situation we're facing. It's not brilliant, let's put it very clearly like that. It is extremely challenging, but I think we have a lot of ideas about what to do, and I think those are some of the things that we're going to discuss here today. Let me begin by saying that, of course, for this European Commission, led by Ursula von der Leyen, very early in the mandate, the Green Deal was put forward as the vision for how to deal not just with energy, but I would say a strategy for economic growth in Europe for this mandate and beyond, and well beyond. Of course, the headline target, climate neutrality by the middle of the century. And that has been very quickly followed up with the Fit for 55 package, which has proposed all the instruments, the legislation that we think we need in order to actually meet those ambitious targets that have been set. What has then happened is that the Russian attack on Ukraine in February of this year has made it even more pressing to achieve the goals which we've set us, both when it comes to climate change, but also when it comes to energy. It has aggravated an already very difficult situation faced coming from these very high prices that I mentioned, and made it clear that the European Union really needs to address its import dependence, its dangerous import dependence on Russian fossil fuels, urgently to secure its security of supply. So we have now clearly said we want to reach independence from Russian gas and other fossil fuels before the end of this decade, well before the end of this decade, in fact, as quickly as possible. And we think we can do that by accelerating the green transition that we already started under the Green Deal. And we can do that with the measures that are currently being discussed and some of which have already been adopted in the EU. In this context, and that is, as you see mentioned in the title of this session, REPowerEU plays a very important role. It sets, in a way, the stage for ramping up investments in clean energy and energy that can help us become independent and bring down prices. It aims to diversify supplies, front-loading renewable energy and improving energy efficiency, and we think that is the best insurance against price shocks and import dependency. To reduce import dependency from Russia, we focus primarily on gas, because that is the area where we are most vulnerable, and that, of course, significantly influences both the heat and the electricity supply, because that's where the global market is less liquid. But this refers as well to phasing out dependence on Russian oil and coal, but there, of course, the EU has broader diversity of potential suppliers. So the REPowerEU plan, which was adopted on 18 May this year, we propose concrete actions to diversify energy supply as far as possible, to accelerate the energy transition and enable emergency measures to alleviate the effects of high energy prices, both on citizens and businesses. And as we speak today, across the street in the Council, the deputy ambassadors are actually now preparing for the Extraordinary Energy Council at the end of this week, where they're going to discuss, shall we say, the second emergency plan, the first one specifically on gas, the second one discussed right now on electricity, and if we have time, we can come back to that a little bit. Heating is especially important in this matter because heating represents about 50% of our energy consumption in the EU and 80% of the gas consumption, because a lot of people heat their houses with gas. And the best way to address the EU import dependence on Russian gas, oil and coal, while at the same time achieve our decarbonisation goal, is to accelerate the deployment of renewables in heating, and of course looking also at the efficiency of how we do that. And in that context, district heating is well placed because it's at the center of our actions to replace fossil fuels, and it can drive the clean energy transition, especially in high population and heat-dense cities. The potential role of district heating has to do with its flexibility to use multiple renewable fuel sources and technologies, and change its heating units at scale and faster than this is possible for individual consumers in apartment blocks or single and multi-family buildings. In short, if you can get this transition done at the level of the district heating rather than individual families having to deal with this, it is certainly a huge advantage. So the REPowerEU plan proposes concrete actions on heating and district heating. We want to front-load the deployment of heat pumps, and we want to reach 30 million newly installed heat pumps in 2030, 10 million units in the next 5 years. We want to develop and modernize district heating systems that can replace fossil fuels in individual heating, to accelerate the deployment and integration of large-scale heat pumps, geothermal and solar thermal energy. And I think all of these things we will discuss in more detail during this session. We want to develop clean communal heating, including district heating and renewable energy communities as part of clean district approaches. And we want to exploit industrial heat and waste heat wherever this is possible. The Fit for 55, and I think this has been a theme for many sessions during this Sustainable Energy Week, is of course a very comprehensive package. It encompasses a multitude of proposals, but on energy, there are really three proposals that are most important, perhaps four. It is the revision of the Energy Efficiency Directive, the revision of the Renewable Energy Directive, the Energy Performance in Buildings Directive, and the ETS. Those four elements form the core of, shall we say, what Fit for 55 is aimed at delivering, which is a 55% CO2 reduction by 2030, and putting the EU on the right path towards carbon neutrality by 2050. I don't think I have time now to go into the more detail of what is going to happen, but I think there are many other sessions that also do that, and I'm sure many of you will be familiar with this. But of course it also involves, and I think that's very important to understand, the increase of the targets that we're setting ourselves, both for energy efficiency and for renewable energy. And what we've done with REPowerEU is to further increase these. In the light of the situation, we want to further accelerate and increase our ambition when it comes to renewables and energy efficiency. So originally, we proposed 40% share of renewables by 2030. This has now, from the Commission side, been proposed as 45. We'll see what comes out of the trilogues that will begin in the next few weeks. But that is important for energy efficiency. Originally, we proposed a 9% increase in energy efficiency. We're now saying 13, and these are really quite ambitious targets. And of course, that means also more ambitious measures, and that is why the REPowerEU plan also contains specific measures, because it's easy to agree these targets. It was also, in a way, telling that the first thing to be agreed in the whole Green Deal was the legally binding target for emission reductions and the climate neutrality target for 2050. What we are now struggling with, and which will probably take a little bit longer, is the concrete measures included in Fit for 55 to actually bring about those changes. Let me perhaps leave it there, Andreas, but let me say that, you know, there is this saying that you should never let a good crisis go to waste. And I think, you know, in every crisis, there's also a challenge and an opportunity. And I think the current crisis is actually an opportunity for Europe to recognize the benefits of energy management and district heating and cooling, and to take concrete steps towards developing the vast potentials which are still there for all of these technologies. It's an important opportunity for district heating and cooling to step into the forefront of the energy transition, in our view, to rapidly ensure modernization of the existing systems, including by bringing in more renewables and bringing in much more solar, both PV and thermal, into our systems. And those are really the key instruments that we need to switch away from fossil fuels in heating, especially natural gas imported from Russia at this moment in time. I'll leave it there, Andreas, and I will try and maybe come in at the very end of the session again with some comments on the debate as it unfolds. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Hans, for these opening remarks. What we heard, I think, was there's a sense of great urgency on the climate crisis. There's a sense of great urgency on the energy crisis, and the Commission has made some very big and bold proposals here that also include energy efficiency, renewables, and district heating. We want to take now a moment to go a little bit deeper into some of these solutions and lay them out for the audience. So their value proposition, so to say, for the climate and REPowerEU. And we will begin with energy efficiency services and management. We have to discuss this topic Pascal Guillermo, who is president of the European Federation for Intelligent Energy Efficiency Services. He's been in the energy efficiency services sector since 1986, so quite some time, very knowledgeable and experienced in the field. Importantly, he is also a board member of Euroheat and Power, one of the other organizations represented on this panel, so perfectly also embodies, let's say, the integrated energy system that we're also envisaging here in REPowerEU. So, Pascal, over to you.
Just checking. Yes, the presentation is online. Thank you, Andreas, for your introduction, and good morning, everybody. I'm really happy to be here with you and have this opportunity to exchange with the panel, with the audience, on this massive challenge ahead of us. We understand it. It's getting rid of these Russian-imported energies. But I'd say the issue is even wider. It's how will we reduce EU's dependency globally to imported fossil energies and do it as quickly as we can, but also in a sustainable way. But before moving to the key topic, I'd like to briefly introduce our members. So we are a trade association. We represent energy services companies, also known under the name of ESCOs, and from 10 member states. Altogether, it's more than 100,000 professionals who on a daily basis design, implement, and manage energy efficiency solutions. But more importantly, what they do is they guarantee that the expected performance, the expected savings, the expected energy consumption reductions are delivered as expected and on the long run. And they are prepared to back this pledge with a financial commitment. So now back to our key topic. My first message here is time is of the essence. To face this challenge, we need to act swiftly and significantly decrease energy consumption. And this starts with addressing behavior. Sobriety starts with adapting usage, and this is probably the fastest leverage we have at hand to make a difference in the short term. But looking at the dimension of the shift that is needed, we all understand that sobriety will not be enough, so we really need to step up energy efficiency. And this calls, amongst other measures, for an unprecedented effort in building renovation. Buildings, roughly 40% of the energy consumption in the EU, mostly for heating purposes, as we heard, and mostly carbonized. So what we need is really to speed up these renovations, but renovations that will effectively meet the expected performance. And we believe, as energy services companies, that we have a unique opportunity to answer to this challenge, because we are here in the buildings on the whole life cycle. We are part of the design of the renovation. We manage it. Besides, we are also active in this demand management, in this sobriety, both through energy coaching, through awareness raising of good practices, and last but not least, as I explained, because we are committed to make sure that the efficiency will be there, will be met and maintained, and this is precisely what energy performance is about. So one of the key proposals that I'd like to submit is that wherever possible, energy performance contracts should be the vehicle of choice for any renovation. But again, energy efficiency may reach its limits in terms of economical viability, and especially on existing business. So obviously, as we heard, we need to speed up also renewable energy deployment. But when we look at energy performance contract, what we see is this type of solutions, they gradually evolve to be more global, more encompassing. In one of the surveys carried out by our French member FEDEN, that covered 150 energy performance contracts for roughly 3,500 buildings, what came out very clearly is that beyond this commitment on energy performance, there was also a commitment on reducing the carbon footprint. And this comes from renewable energy deployment on site or through connection to efficient district heatings. So again, what we see is this energy performance contract becoming energy and carbon performance contracts with solutions as the one you can see here that has been implemented in a French region, where the commitment is to decrease the energy consumption by 30%, but the carbon footprint by 40% through creating small biomass-based district heatings and replacing fuel boilers. Which leads me naturally to the interaction between energy efficiency, renovations, and energy infrastructures. Considering again the size of the challenge, we cannot work in silos. And when we renovate buildings, we need to ensure that they are designed to get the optimum efficiency of the upstream energy infrastructure. Talking about energy, district heatings, it means as low temperature as we can to optimize the efficiency, but also to optimize the recovery of low temperature renewable sources like geothermal energy or waste heat. So whether it's through design or through its operation, we believe ESCOs have a role to support energy efficiency upstream. And conversely, what we see increasingly happening is district heating's operator who understand that they have also to act downstream. And on this example that you see in the Warsaw district heating, the operator has committed to some of its customers to decrease their energy consumption through energy performance agreements. So my last message is, together, we have to work on the whole value chain of energy, and together we can really make a difference. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for this opening presentation. And we now move on to a very different sector. So we're moving more into the renewable space. Guillermo Kioni is Vice President for Business Development at Solar Heat Europe. He's also a director at Solar Heat Europe, as well as a member of the steering committee of the European Solar Thermal Technology Platform. He brings a long career in solar heating and the perspective of integrating renewables into buildings as well as district heating infrastructures. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Andreas. Thank you for inviting us to present the perspective of the solar thermal sector. I have a presentation, but I will just show you one single slide. Solar Heat Europe is the European Association of the solar thermal industry, and of course we represent a lot of different manufacturers and service providers. And solar thermal is not new in the energy or global energy scenario. In Europe today, we know we have installed something around 35 gigawatt of energy production. So we're talking about energy generation here, not energy efficiency or energy utilization. So it's something that contributes directly to the reduction from outside sources of primary energy. And therefore, I believe it's a crucial infrastructure for Europe to develop in order to acquire more independence and security in the energy market. The targets that you are seeing here are what the industry believes it can achieve with great effort before 2030. and they are meaningful targets, because when we say 100 gigawatt of renewable heat generation through solar thermal, we are providing a significant contribution to the targets that we mentioned. But now the next question is, are they binding targets or indicative targets? I would say that they are indicative, because there's a number of conditions that are attached to the achievements of these targets. So to quadruple our installations from now to 2030, I mean, is tomorrow. I'd like to offer to you the perspective not only of the association, but also of an industrial company like my company. I mean, TBP Solar, we have invested like 100 million euros in the development of the production capacity of the technology, and then of the production capacity. And we are going to triple these investments in the coming years. It's a big effort. And an industrial plan like this, and like the other industrial plans of similar companies in solar thermal, they require some really practical conditions to happen. So it's not like the investors are going to put all the money required for the ramp up of the production 4 times, just like that. And just to give you an idea, a practical idea in terms of numbers of what I'm talking about, for example, just for example, my company has a target for 2030 to install 5 gigawatts of solar thermal collectors, which means more or less 8.8 million square meters of collectors. Today, we have 80,000 square meters of collectors production capacity in our factory. So multiplying this by 100 is a huge industrial effort and requires a market that is clearly capable of absorbing this production capacity. So today we are seeing in the current legislation that is being put forward clear and important signals that this market will be there in the form of targets that today are unfortunately as indicative as our targets are. Indicative targets are important because they set the path in front of us, but might not be sufficient to mobilize the investment levels that we are talking about, because we need some certainty that our final users will be ready to adopt it. And of course, solar thermal has different clusters of final users that are, for example, the buildings, and we are already present quite a lot in the building sector with the individual installations, but they are also new adopters like the district heating sector, which I believe is the next low-hanging fruit for solar thermal, and can absorb quite a lot of capacity, because they resemble very much the electrical sector, because they are a network, they can accept heat and distribute it to a multiplicity, so diversified base of final users. And then there is the industrial sector. So if we focus, for example, just on the district heating sector, which is the topic of today, we believe that they are a low-hanging fruit because their needs in terms of quality of the heat that they use are very much in line with what solar thermal can provide. And there are already there is already a significant track record of solar thermal installation on district heating. This needs to be expanded. It is happening in some cases. For example, in Germany, there is a strong investment program being carried out with significant public funds being deployed. In other countries, honestly, much less. And what we are seeing, from the perspective of someone who is developing projects, is that the final users are mostly hesitant. And this hesitation comes from false hopes, we believe. The hope that the gas market will go back to normal, and that there will be no real commitment from member states to implement binding targets on renewable heat on district networks. This is something that needs to be addressed, I believe, because this is the only way that investors can really truly believe in our solution and invest in the production capacity, invest in project development, and therefore be able to actually deliver the kind of targets that we are talking about here. So just to not make it too long, industrial activity and investment activity are all infrastructure investments topics, and they need these methodologies to be in place. In photovoltaic, we have seen this happening already. We want this to happen also for solar thermal, and this means that we will need to deploy a number of financial instruments to support project development and project implementation at a large scale and really quickly. So what I am not seeing today in what is being presented is the level of urgency that we have. Because, 2030, for an industrial plan like the one we're talking about, is really tomorrow. And we should be building factories like hell. And we are not doing that. But why? Because the conditions, although promising, are not there to safeguard new investment, to assess risks that are attached to the implementation of a large industrial investment plans and project infrastructure investment plans in the district heating and also in the industrial sector. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you. Oh, yeah.
Thank you very much. And so, yeah, we've heard there's a great potential in solar thermal and a lot yet still to be done. And I hope we can dive into some of those questions in the next round. But let us first move over to an infrastructure sector that unites, to some extent, also these other panelists, the infrastructure of district energy. And we have with us today Managing Director of Euroheat and Power, Aurélie Beauvais, who has been heading the organization since the beginning of this year, and will present to us exactly the role of district energy in this broader context of REPowerEU.
Yes, thank you very much, Andreas, and hello, everyone. It's always good to go last for the presentations because a lot of things have already been said, and you can then focus on other things you wanted to say but would not have had time to. But maybe just to reframe a bit, I think that the title of the session is really harnessing the potential of our technologies, district heating and cooling and energy management in the REPowerEU. And when we look at the REPowerEU, the objective is very straightforward. It's really reducing our dependence from Russia when it comes to imported fossil fuels, and Hans explained it already very clearly. And it's good that you pointed out also that it was not only about gas, because we hear a lot about reducing the gas demand, but we are not only dependent on Russia for gas, also very much for coal and oil imports. And all of it ends up today in heating. Buildings are also a critical keyword and common endeavor for all of us here because they represent 40% of our European consumption. And heating, indeed, is one of the main problems we face here today when it comes to ensuring the reduction of our gas supply in the next years. So the current crisis is a heating crisis, and it has been said already many times. Where we need to insist, and where it's important to insist, I think, is the size of the challenge. It's huge. We're talking about enormous volumes and very short amounts of time. And we tend in the European debate to look for simple answers and to look for the technology. I think it's important to say at this point in time that the challenge is so big that it is not about the technology, but what are the technologies that can work together, whether it's electricity, heating and cooling, and other sources that can really help deliver this. So it's true that the REPowerEU has done a lot, but it has been very focused on electricity and hydrogen, I think. And from our perspective, it needs to look beyond that to really work on system integration and to really focus on all types of sustainable heating and cooling solutions. And the second element is that, to some extent, the REPowerEU has to look beyond the REPowerEU because we need to find short-term solutions that are also procuring a long-term path to the heating transition, because we don't want any lock-in. We don't want any stranded assets. So that's also a very core reflection in how our technologies can deliver the REPowerEU. How can they also pave the way to the longer heating transition that we need? In this regard, district heating and cooling is not only well placed, as you said, we think it's an absolute necessity. Really, and to focus much more on it at European level. I thought it would be interesting for us to just take a step back and explain to you all what it is, because actually it is not a technology that is so known by the broad public, and that is really a pity because it has amazing benefits. But we are basically talking about a proven, efficient solution to deliver heating and cooling to buildings via water in insulated pipes. So we deliver heating, hot water, and cooling. And for that, we are basically harnessing all type of clean energy sources that are revolving around us, whether it is renewable heating, whether it is renewable electricity via power to heat, whether it is using fossil fuels more efficiently where you have no choice but to use it, harvesting waste heat from urban environments. So it is a very beautiful and versatile technology which can be applied everywhere and complement renewable electrification strategies everywhere to reduce fossil fuels in buildings. But district heating and cooling, it's also about solving the three critical challenges that you mentioned, Hans. And I'm happy that you said that because it fits perfectly with the three next points. You said we have three challenges. It's climate, security of supply, and affordability. And when we talk about district heating and cooling, we talk about a solution that is clean, directly actionable, and I think this element is very important. It can be rolled out very quickly, and it is fair. And I will just explain a bit more what we're talking about here, because to deliver the objectives of the REPowerEU, as we said, we need a technology, we need technologies that can help us cut drastically fossil fuels in buildings. Not in 10 years' time, not in 15 years' time, but in 5 years' time, probably looking at the size of the challenge. And when we talk about district heating and cooling, we can achieve both significant energy savings. So as it was explained, if you switch from individual systems where you are, for example, still using fossil fuels, switching from an individual system to a heating network, which is more centralized, will already reduce the use of fossil fuels by up to 30%, depending on the locations. That is absolutely enormous. And this transition is gradual. We will not change all our system from fossil fuels overnight. So also having a transitional approach to it is quite useful. And the beauty is that you take then the same technology and you integrate, you then replace the fossil fuels with harvesting basically the sustainable sources that are available. We heard about solar thermal, geothermal is a big potential. Waste heat, really remember waste heat. Maybe all of you in this room know this term, but the potential in Europe is here and it is gigantic. If you recover industrial heat, heat from data centers, cement, ceramics, you can supply up to 25% of the current heat demand. And this is heating sources that are located close to urban areas and can be recycled in a heating network. Power to heat, also a very promising solution as we have cheaper and cheaper renewable electricity and we have markets that are marked with higher shares of renewable electricity. We can also use technologies such as heat pumps or heat boilers to push the frontiers of solar and wind into the heating industry. And that is also a very clean way to replace fossil fuels. Actionable is the second aspect I mentioned. So we need something that can be rolled out in the next 2 to 5 years. And sometimes in the REPowerEU, there is a bit this blurriness. I follow what you said, Guillermo, on, are we really talking, are we having the sense of urgency really that we're facing? Because when we talk about district heating and cooling, we talk about something that is already done everywhere and can be rolled out very quickly, something that can grow significantly. We talk about also kind of low-hanging fruits. We have a pre-existing infrastructure in Europe, and it's quite significant. 60 million citizens are served by district heating and cooling in the EU. 140 million European citizens live in areas which are close to a heat network. they can be directly accessed to and connected as we speak. And I explained earlier how it can help reducing fossil fuels in buildings. The last aspect is fastly deployed. I think I will not insist further. Finally, fair, and it's important to end on this point, because I really think, as you said also, Hans, before, we are facing an unprecedented situation. And for those of you that are here in this room or listening online, I am sure you have heard for the first time in your life in the past week so much people talking about energy prices. That has been my case. I've heard about energy bills that I could never believe would be possible. It is a serious crisis we are facing. And some of us will be able to pay our bills. Some of us will face very difficult time. And it's important to point out that if we don't address this fairness, it is the whole unity of Europe that is threatened. And we know that, because we know that we will face more political backlash as we are not able to solve this crisis. So we need something that combines two aspects. First, it needs to be inclusive. And that was also something highlighted in the opening session by MEP Pernille Weiss. We need something that ensures technology diversity can be used by all types of countries. And district heating and cooling is also something that is very developed in Central and Eastern countries. You have 16 million Polish citizens heating with district heating and cooling. You have 18% of the Bulgarian population, which today relies on district heating and cooling. So we can harvest all local sources wherever they are to deliver an inclusive transition. The last aspect, affordable, of course, because basically when you source yourself with local heating sources, you are also shielding your consumers from price volatility. And that is the last reason why we believe the REPowerEU should focus much more than it is today on district heating and cooling. And I'm happy to discuss why afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Aurélie. And let me begin, before I go over to a discussion with the panelists, let me begin by reminding you that you can use the QR code to pose questions to the panelists via Slido. We'll be taking those questions in a few minutes after a brief discussion. And I wanted to start now by asking each of the panelists who have kind of laid out their sector's contribution or potential contribution to REPowerEU and addressing the climate crisis to comment on now the framework that you would need to deliver on exactly this potential. And so to start with you, Pascal, you mentioned energy efficiency is not just about quantity, it's also about quality, it's about performance, and your industry is able to do just that. You're also, as an industry, able to contribute to tie waste heat, for example, into district heating infrastructure, to make the buildings perform in a way that you can lower temperatures, for example, in district heating. But what is the policy framework? What are the policies and the, let's say, broader societal framework that you need for your sector to really thrive?
Okay. I'd like to get back to what Hans said at the beginning, remembering that what we're facing and this drive to get rid of fossil fuels, it's also about climate change. It is about making sure that vulnerable households will be able to cope with these very difficult moments, but it's also getting rid of fossil fuels and making sure that we don't forget, through those dramatic events in Ukraine, what happened last summer, what happened this summer in terms of climate events. So the substance is that REPowerEU is really aligned with the Fit for 55 package. It's just going faster, going further. And to a large extent, some of the recommendations we made for the Fit for 55 package, they are more than ever valid. You understood from what I said that I'm a true believer that energy performance contract is a key asset, because this is what will make the performance really visible, actual, and sustained. There are a number of good provisions in the current projects. The proposal for the Energy Efficiency Directive, as it stands, states that when a public body is contemplating renovating a building or procuring services with a significant energy content, they should consider first the option of doing it through an energy performance contract. It's a very good provision, to the extent that the European Parliament has proposed amendments to even make it stronger. But we believe that more could be done also on that front. For example, if the choice is made not to implement a performance-based contract, like energy performance contracting, then we believe that the reasons why should be formalized and communicated. Not for policing, but also because we know that if we want to speed up the adoption of energy performance contract, we need to identify the barriers, the obstacles, and remove them. Understanding why people who should do it don't choose it will help us removing those obstacles. Second, we are calling for stronger support in terms of public aids whenever there is a guarantee on the performance. When there is an energy performance contract or a guaranteed saving, it seems normal that the support is secured. When we look at the amount of public money we are going to invest in those projects, we need to make sure that it's spent wisely. Hence, if there is somebody accountable to deliver the expected performance, we believe it should be recognized by a higher support. We've called for it in the state aids revisions. We haven't been heard yet, but we will persist. Still, it's something that can be done at member state level. And in a similar area, when you look at what is in place in France for energy saving certificates, when you invest in assets that will improve the energy performance, if it's done within the framework of an energy performance contract, the number of certificates is higher, just because the performance will not be eroded over time. So it really makes sense. Looking at another key piece of legislation, which is the Energy Performance for Building Directive, these emphasize the fact that countries, member states, should propose renovation action plans. We would expect that these action plans state very clearly the proportion of renovations that have been done under an energy performance contract. This is a key performance indicator that we would expect to see in those type of plans submitted to the Commission, and it should be assessed. Last but not least, when we look at renovation, I said that this REPowerEU is in the line of Fit for 55, but it's a slightly different emphasis. We need to go faster. So we should also better recognize the staged deep renovations, because, okay, it's fine, we need to have, at the end of the day, buildings which are carbon neutral. But in the short term, we need to do something, and even if the time is not right for a full-fledged deep renovation, then let's do what we can, and the do-nothing option is not an option. So we should contemplate, alongside the deep renovations, the stage deep renovations, because they are an answer to what we feel is urgent. It needs to happen today.
Thank you very much. And let me just ask one follow-up question. So you touched largely around on the broader policy framework you would need into the future, I would say. In the very short term, we now have a coming winter that's going to be difficult for Europe. Some public sector bodies, for example, have now, or governments have set up energy savings targets for their public buildings. There are some requirements for commercial buildings, for example. Are energy performance contracts playing a role in these short-term measures so far?
There are indeed, you saw that amongst the things that we do in projects, there are energy coaching actions. I mentioned this survey that was carried out on 150 energy performance contracts. Half of them had energy coaching, energy awareness actions. And as we all know, the tomorrow's savings is about behavior and sobriety. So we are actors in that, and for example, in our discussions with the French states, French authorities, we are proposing to relay support these sobriety best practice that they will ask for. And concretely, when you want to decrease the heating of buildings, we know that one of the solutions is to decrease by 1 degree the average temperature in the buildings, which brings about 7 to 8% energy savings. To do that and to make it happen, you need a building that is well balanced. You need to ensure that if there is one flat that is heated at 19, the other ones won't be at 17 or 22. And this needs actions, investments, and we are prepared to do it and support this drive to reducing significantly and in the short term the energy consumption.
Thank you very much. And so now to move over again to solar heating, solar thermal, I think you've already laid out quite clearly that your sector sees a great potential. I think it was a 4 or 5 scale increase is possible by 2030. At the same time, you highlighted that a lot of the measures were not in place to really secure the demand for your industry to invest into it. So the investments we're starting to see, for example, in heat pump manufacturing are not happening in your industry at the scale you would like to see, or that we should be seeing if we want to deliver on REPowerEU. Tell us a little bit about the framework you think would be necessary now to deliver.
So let me reply to you like this. A solar district heating project, any solar district heating project, could take the fastest that I've ever seen, 3 years from concept to implementation. So before generating any impact, 3 years is really the bare minimum. You need the community to agree on allocating the right land to install the plant. Then you need a feasibility study, you need spatial planning, you need a lot of, and then financial packaging and so on and so forth. So it's clear that today there is a need for this, but this need does not translate into a demand. And this is the conundrum and what we have to solve. To create a sense of urgency into the final users, they are community companies, basically. District heating is a community service. So the cities should be the first one to be asking and clearly to their district heating companies to have more local renewable generation to safeguard against energy crisis and security issues. And then we should support them, of course, because it's a matter of carrot and stick. You know, you need to give them a carrot, and at least to start this process, we should have a wide-scale financial support to develop feasibility studies, because that's the base, okay? And then we should eliminate a lot of red tape. So we need to fast-track these projects because the situation is urgent. In order to have an impact by 2030, all these things need to be in place. And as I said, in some countries we are seeing this happening. In others, there's a goodwill. I don't know, for example, in France, ADEME has this Fond Chaleur that is working pretty well, although quite slow, we have to say. So in any case, some good practices are there. We need to replicate them, to enhance them, and also to create the actual need to implement this project rather than waiting and seeing. Because the attitude, I can understand it. I know it's only human. You have a system that works based on gas, cogeneration, and other energy sources, and you are reluctant to change it because it's a big inertia in implementing a new and innovative investment in any domain. But things are happening. We need to take this practice and elevate them to common practices. So I guess that feasibility study development and putting the urgency on the cities and on the municipal companies to at least have a minimum percentage share of renewable heat in their network could do the trick.
So if I hear correctly, then one is the demand side by creating targets. The other one is the planning and the feasibility planning at the beginning. We have in the Fit for 55 package some recommendations or binding requirements for local governments to do heat planning. But if we look at the timelines, maybe it starts in 2025, 2026. Then maybe they would start putting in place the measures to accelerate permitting, et cetera. So we might not get to where you would like to. What is the timeline you would see for these things happening to get us to the maximum potential by 2030?
I think we have a great opportunity right now to give clear indications in the existing legislation. I understand it's difficult for every member state to agree on binding targets, but it is the only way I see to start a process that can deliver actual impacts by 2030. So it's really, I believe, not yesterday, but at least today.
Thank you very much. And let's move now finally to also talk to get the perspective of the district energy industry again, and maybe also potentially you could also pick up on some of the issues that were just touched upon. If local governments are currently not, let's say, demanding renewable energy, what are the solutions we need to make the full use of your infrastructure, your technology, your industry towards REPowerEU?
Yes, and I will gladly pick up because indeed many good elements have been said. Maybe starting with you, Andreas, because it's a question you asked as well, shorter measures, shorter impact. I think here we don't hear enough as well what probably citizens don't want to hear, which is that probably anyway, in the shorter term, the solution is that we give up a bit on our comfort, we are solidar with each other, and we actually save energy by reducing the heating of our houses. And the truth is that in the next 6 months, that's probably the best we can do to ensure that the lights are staying on. There are little technologies that can deliver the full fuel switch in 6 months. You mentioned 3 years, Guillermo. Actually, that's not so bad a time frame when we look at all the other, the regular time frame you need to develop any type of energy project. We're talking long-term planning. So in the short term, we're going to need to work together and work on energy sobriety. And I'm sure, that's what the Commission has been focusing on a lot. But when it comes to the REPowerEU, as we said earlier, it's also about setting the path for a more resilient Europe. And in the next 3 years, a lot can be achieved, a lot can be done. I think heat plannings, obviously, it should be an emergency measures. And it's quite not understandable why we keep that in the Fit for 55 package. It's very good. But the first thing I would do if I don't have heating in my home is to look around me and see with what I can heat myself. That's the base. So right now, if we look at local authorities, if we look at cities, which is where most of our citizens are located, we need to assess the resources that are available and at hand right now, because we need to develop those heating networks or those electricity networks wherever they can be developed to heat our buildings. So heat planning, really, it should be an emergency measures. It should be supported as part of the REPowerEU. It should be mandatory in most of the bigger cities, because that is how we're going to be able to make the most of the local sources which we have, which are also more shielded from global price volatility, because also, very lucky or smart, the one that can predict the future of our energy markets in the next 3 years. It's very hard. The second element, you mentioned the carrot and the stick, and I agree that to replace fossil fuels, we also need kind of a supporting framework. And I think we have seen, I come from the electricity sector initially, in 10 years, with appropriate incentives and frameworks, what have we done? It's a wonder the success story of renewable electricity in Europe. We have the cheapest sources ever. Growth is booming. We are setting this path for renewable hydrogen. Where is the path for renewable heating and cooling technologies? We need dedicated financial incentives. We need dedicated support for cities, absolutely. I mean, they need to be helped financially and resource-wise to assess their own resources, but we need also dedicated national funds with much stronger focus in RRF, Regional Development Fund, etc. We need to support the gradual ban of fossil-only heating appliances in building. I mean, that's also necessary. In many countries, we see, like France, for example, Denmark, Netherlands, Austria, we see good progress. And in fact, we can see that you have frameworks like mandatory connection requirements to sustainable district heating and cooling systems, state aid to help customers connect simply to a heating network when you have one nearby. All of this can really help. And I think it's about also having more awareness at European level, having the EU also taking more ownership of district heating and cooling as a solution to promote it in their various financial and regulatory instruments. And from this perspective, the Fit for 55 for us is a good beginning, but it's a beginning because the challenge is much bigger for the full transition of our heating system.
Thank you very much. And with that, I would now like to go over to the Slido questions. This is perhaps an interesting one, a more controversial one, I'll take it nonetheless. So we talked now broadly, Aurélie, about the, let's say, short-term measures that are in some ways more structural measures. So this is heat planning. This is putting in place the regulatory framework that in the next years we can have major investments. There are some measures that can probably be taken a little bit quicker. Some of them are perhaps controversial nonetheless. One of them is, for example, using waste from energy plants and feeding them into existing grids that we have today. There are a few other measures that can be taken in the short term. So I don't know how much you want to comment on this specific one of its ability to also contribute in the short term via district heating. But what are the broader set of really short term measures that can be taken in your industry, just to flesh that out a little bit beyond the structural over the next 5 years, let's say?
I mean, it was written waste to energy, so I don't know if it refers to producing energy from waste or using the excess heat that is basically from the combustion of fossil sources. But I think, yes, both are necessary. I mean, in the end, what we're talking about today, what we hear countries saying is, in many aspects, we're going to have to switch gas from coal. We know that's what is going to happen in the near term. It doesn't mean you can put in place long-term solutions. And I think that's what I said earlier, that with district heating and cooling, you can both use fossil fuels more efficiently and quite more efficiently in the very short term. And part of it is that instead of simply producing electricity, you also retrieve the heat that is created from combustion and you use it in the network to heat the networks. And that is not a long-term solution because in the long term, there will be no fossil fuels. But as the network is there, you can then progressively integrate, of course, more sustainable sources like solar thermal in district heating, which, as it was said, can be deployed in 3 years. So I think right now, all options are open because the point is enabling our citizens to heat themselves. And that's a very serious question. And not only the heating in buildings, by the way, industry. The day our industries start to shut down, I mean, we're going to have millions of unemployed people. We need to realize the size of the challenge. I think I don't want to be too dramatic, but this is what we're facing concretely. So I would say all local options are on the table, and this is an important one. And when it comes also to from energy production, from waste incineration, which is present in a lot of countries in Europe. We have one in Brussels from the waste incineration plant next to Canal, which is also heating a whole residential and commercial area with the docks. We are today not really managing our waste streams in an optimal way in Europe. We need to increase the recycling very much, but whatever is left in terms of waste, it's either, there are not much opportunities, but actually creating energy from it by burning it is a very suitable option in many countries for the near term, instead of, for example, burying it in land or just sending it abroad. I think also the waste incineration industry has quite a lot of hidden aspects, such as the retrieving CO2 molecules for the chemical industry. There is a whole ecosystem which can be built also around those solutions to make them more sustainable. And in the current framework, as I said earlier, it's not about a silver bullet. It's about harnessing what we have at hand today, making something that can both work on the short term and deliver on the long term. And this is a transition.
Maybe we can pull up the Slido questions again. But one question I did notice was on circular economy. And I did want to ask Pascal to see if he wants to come in on this. So we already mentioned, or I tried to mention the link here between, for example, waste heat and district energy. Are the companies represented in your industry association also managing exactly such projects, or looking into it as a future source for district energy, and managing exactly those industrial waste sources and feeding them in? Is this aspect of circular economy something that you are looking into?
Indeed, and this is a strong link between what we do as energy service companies and district heating, because waste heat is not only a source of energy, it's a source of energy efficiency. Because anyway, the energy is already used. Let's not get it to waste, as was said before. So we are quite active. And one thing I'd like to highlight is that not only should we contemplate the potential for increased connection, but there is already plants where there is a potential to get more. So the energy is already produced, whether it's from waste or industrial sites, and it's just waiting here to be used. There are a number of challenges to make it happen. One of those challenges is that if you're looking at industrial plants, for example, they look at it as an energy efficiency project, and their time to commit, they can commit for a limited number of years. If you're building an infrastructure like a district heating, you need a longer time span. So we need tools, de-risking mechanism to make it happen. But increasingly, we see a project where, coming from the energy efficiency side, we say, well, there is available energy, there is a community to be heated, let's build together something.
I want to see now also if there are any questions specifically from this room as well. If so, please raise your hand, and I'm very happy to take a question. Please.
Tried to type the Slido question, but it was too long and didn't allow me to send the question. It was on the district heating, but maybe more generally, I really believe we need to also reduce the demand. Also, when it comes to solar thermal or district heating, when we look at Czechia, still district heating is 45% coal, 25% gas. And when we look at some cases together with the District Heating Association in Czechia, to get a sustainable district heating, we basically need to reduce the demand by half as a rule of thumb. It will depend on a locality. So that's one thing. And the other is, in some cases, because the district heating in Czechia is legacy district heatings coming from 60s, 70s, moving towards the fourth generation district heatings will mean it's decentralization actually. So less and smaller cubes. So just to give you a Central Eastern European perspective on that, but the main message is like reducing demand is a key on most of our steps, because we won't have, even for renewable energy, we won't have enough to waste it. It was more a comment, sorry.
Does either of you want to respond?
Yes, of course. I mean, just to say, I absolutely agree, and that's why I was saying earlier that it all starts with energy sobriety. I mean, we don't want to hear it, but we will need to consume less, all of us, and that's the crude reality. Because also, when the world consumes as much as we all consume today, we're going to be in even deeper problems. So yes, reducing demand in general is absolutely necessary to be able to increase the share of clean sources, whether it is electricity, whether it is heating, whether it is hydrogen, where it is used. We need to be more energy efficient. And I think in this regard, district heating has a contribution which is supported by science and academics when it comes to at least being able to reduce the needs that we have in terms of primary energy input for heating. And what you said about the need to build new and modern infrastructures, of course, to clean district heating and cooling systems is absolutely true. And that is where I think we need stronger support from the EU, because the truth is that in building in a fourth generation heating system costs money. It is quite an investment, and you cannot expand your network and modernize your network if you don't have predictability on how much consumers will be connected to your network. If you know, it is just a complete anarchy as to whom decides to connect to whatever in local cities, you cannot really have visibility on how much customers you will have connected in your modern grid, which means you don't have visibility on whether you will be able to retrieve your investments. So in a way, I think we reach a period where we will need to reach some levels of prescriptive planification, kind of, where in some areas where you have sustainable, available heat sources which can be fed into a heat network, and that's the best way to heat the buildings, we should actually mandate districts to connect to such technologies. In areas where you know, a PV rooftop panel and a heat pump is the best solution, then let's go for it. But I think it requires much more planification at local level, so that various technology providers can also have more visibility, basically, on how much demand they will get, and therefore how much economies of scale they can make by developing this or this type of technology. And that's also very valid for heat pumps, residential, but also large scale, because large scale heat pumps are a very key component of future renewable district heatings.
So that points again to the need to have planning of heating actually be seen as an emergency measure, as you mentioned before. You wanted to come in.
Yeah, just two little comments about this. So improving the efficiency of the distribution network by improving the pipelines and so on, it's very useful also to accept new sources of energy. In the case of fourth generation district heating, the temperature of operation is quite lower, and this allows you to, for example, use lower temperature heat sources like solar thermal. And this is first comment. The second is, whenever somebody comes to us, say, I want to do a solar thermal project, the first thing we ask is, okay, how much space do you have? Because without space, there's no solar project. And sometimes for district heating, I mean, most of the times, the district network is concentrated in the center of cities where sometimes you don't have space. So it's important in the planning phase that some provision is made in order to connect the pipeline to nearby available land plots in which you can actually deploy solar projects. And this is something that sometimes it's not taken into consideration.
If I may add a small comment on this issue of energy savings, one of the challenges to lower the temperature of the district heatings is that no matter what you do, at the end of the day, the buildings connected might require high temperature. And this is why I emphasized earlier that when we renovate buildings, we as energy efficiency operators should not only do it contemplating the merit of the building, but think with the system, the district approach, and make sure that we do it in a way that will help the district heating lower its temperature, which has at least two benefits. One, improve efficiency and increase the amount of renewable you can capture, renewable or waste heat. And the second, it makes more viable connection of buildings which would have not been reachable on a higher temperature.
We have a question in the room.
Thank you. Carsten Rothball from ICLEI Local Governments for Sustainability. In this regard, I would like to also ask my questions here on the perspectives of fast-track planning and implementation within cities. I welcome and observe the changing frameworks now on the European level, trickling down to the national level. But in the case of urgency, local planning was already mentioned. I advocate here for using solutions like hot maps, thermos, software, which is available, which allows strategic local district heating planning. But where would you think are now the next steps in terms of 3 years planning for cities? Do we need sandboxes here that are allowed, that can allow fast-track implementation of projects? What are good examples here from your perspective in this moment? Thank you.
So yes, the challenge to our panel now. How do we get this 3-year planning perspective for solar thermal, for district heating, but maybe also for energy efficiency services? I noted one question on Slido as well that said, well, you know, we understand your value proposition, but we're not seeing the demand for energy performance contracts in the way that you might have laid out. So, you know, how can we increase demand for actually your services very quickly? So for all three of you, maybe you want to feed in some ideas.
So maybe quickly starting from saying that, as you said, in fact, it's also the technologies are there, and I will even say that supporting cities to do heat planning is a very lively, innovative environment. You have a lot of startups, European startups today, that are working to develop softwares which actually facilitate greatly the work for local authorities to be able to identify the heat sources where they are available, but also to help you plan your network in the most efficient way. So when you look at those maps today, you really see those softwares which show you, okay, in this area, you know, that's not cost efficient. Here you have a plant here and there, and this is where your network should go through. And in terms of how you then bring this district energy network to life, we often talk about, you know, the NIMBY effect, etc. I mean, here we are mostly talking about opening streets like you would do if you were to do any type of water or electricity management. And I know that for, you know, for all of us that are living in Brussels, open street is not something we're not used to. It happens every day. So the simplicity of implementing this technology is also a very positive element. But what I think is we need to have a drive at political level. I really think it's important, a political drive from the EU and national level to support the cities in resource which are human and financial. And then we need to create a cooperation with companies, because indeed local authorities usually are not equipped to know what are the paths that can be achieved. But if you collaborate with district energy companies, usually they work hand in hand with the local authority actually to define those steps, to agree on those sources that can be harvested. So the 3 years plan is more about putting the right people together, the renewable heat developers, the district energy network operators, and the communities which want to be active in this network. It's more about putting people together than any concrete barrier I can think of.
Guillermo?
Yeah, as much as I agree with you, Aurélie, I think that these measures of awareness raising and inducing some investment decisions would take a long time. And this happened already. There are already a lot of fora in which cities are confronted with their needs to be more sustainable, etc. But the results are not necessarily what we expect. So I really go back to the carrot and stick. And we should have legislation in place that says do your homework and support the sustainability of your energy production and distribution system, and we will support you financially. Don't do it, and you will pay for it. This is the same principle of the EU ETS, just to say one example, or with biofuel share on the gas pumps. You know that you. So it's important that there is a clear policy standpoint in which we say either you do it and we help you, or you don't do it and we punish you.
So we need an enabling framework. We need guardrails and requirements, let's say. What do you want to add?
What you just said is music to my ears,
because this is precisely what we are recommending, which is to say, okay, you need to support refurbishment of buildings. However, you want money, fine, but we need to be sure that it will be delivered on plan, on budget, and on performance. So this is why we are advocating to make sure that whenever there is a public support, the higher the commitment, the higher the support. And besides, we also have some homework to do, let's be honest, because one of the challenges we have is that energy performance contracts are perceived as complex in terms of implementation. So this is why within the industry, we have worked on simplified contracts to make it accessible to smaller players, small cities, condominiums, so people who don't want to have too much burden, a huge contract. It can be worthwhile for a big building in La Défense or in the center of the city. If you're talking smaller buildings, let's keep it simple, accessible, because this is the way we can really take off and have this adoption rate really get booming.
So before handing over to Aurélie, we're going to close this session now with a final round. So each of you are going to have an opportunity to just reflect in 1 minute on what we've talked about today and leave the audience with any final remarks. So I'll start with Aurélie. You have a little bit more time, but then wrap up in your 1 minute. Over to you.
Yes, thank you, Andreas. No, I just wanted to say that what both of you said, obviously, I mean, mandatory prescriptive frameworks, that's what I've been saying earlier. So there's nothing I disagree with. But you cannot go, the question was also about engaging local authorities. And, you know, you don't engage local authorities by telling them, okay, that's what you need to do in 2 years and just deal with it. Prescriptive frameworks are necessary, but if we don't create a business ecosystem around it with the right players, and if we don't bridge those actors together, being local government and companies active in Europe, we will not succeed. And the ecosystem still has to be built. And there are very good initiatives from the Commission, such as the Smart Cities Marketplace, which have been supported from various EU projects, which we believe can also create this platform. And for building renovation, it is the same. We have had binding targets for building renovations for ages. It is not happening. Why? Because we don't manage to put the right players together and to make it easy for the users to engage. And that remains a huge bottleneck. Now, when it comes to the wrap-up measures, I mean, I will just say that I think the discussion today for me was very comforting. It was comforting to hear also what you said, Hans, about the perspective of the Commission on district heating and cooling. I think we can do much more, but what I hear also from our conversation is that we have clear ideas on how to make this happen. And that's already a good beginning, because at least I know where we have to head towards together.
Thank you. Guillermo.
Yes. What I try to put forward here is an industrial perspective. There is a lot to be done, and industrial times are not quick at all. And both the ramp up of the production requires huge investments, and to put together investments, you need additional effort that take time. But if the market perspectives are there, I mean, the private capital is quick to react. And so what we need to really do is to show them that there is a market, is to show them that the ramp up is possible and it's evidently required by the market. So again, I strongly believe that we are on the right track, and we are in planning properly with the Fit for 55, with the RED 3 and so on. We need to put more effort in creating the conditions for this urgency that is there, and is every day is being showed by, I don't know, climatic events and energy disruption, energy market disruption. We really need to show them in practice into a more prescriptive legislation, which does not mean that it doesn't need to be supported with the soft actions, but for sure it provides a framework for investment to happen.
Thank you. Pascal.
Sorry. I'd like to close by saying that we are present in millions of households, in thousands of offices, in thousands of industrial sites. It is also our responsibility to make it change. We can do it in the short term, as I explained, through these behavioral aspects, this awareness raising, this involvement of the users, of the occupants. But we also, and it's quite short term, but we also have a responsibility as energy managers to look at for solutions, to connect to district heatings, to implement solar energy. So we're in Belgium, and they say l'union fait la force. I'd say together we are stronger, and working together, we can make a difference.
Thank you. And now we're coming full circle, and I'm going to give Hans van Steen one last minute here to also reflect on what he heard here today and give us any last thoughts.
Thank you, Andreas. I heard a lot of really, really interesting things. I hope that the people in the room and the people online have really taken good note, because I think so many important things have been said. And what is really encouraging for me, because we heard great pitches from these three people on the panel here, and they all explained what they're doing, be it energy services and performance contracting, thermal solar or district energy, why that is really important. And it's absolutely true. It's all necessary, because if you look at the scale of the challenges that we're facing, we need all of these things, and we need it much more than what we're seeing today. You know, when we did the impact assessment for Fit for 55, back in the days when things were moving at a pace where we could still do impact assessments for the things that we were proposing, we did the climate target plan, which was a huge analysis that actually showed that it is doable, but it requires so much. And now we're piling things on top of the targets that we set ourselves in that plan. So the challenges are huge. So we need all of these things absolutely, and we need them now as quickly as possible. I think the REPowerEU is a good instrument for that. There's, of course, a lot of things in there. Aurélie, you said that it should have had more focus on heating, and maybe the name REPower, at least for sort of people who are energy connoisseurs, will think of electricity and not heating. I think you shouldn't be too worried about that. I think REPower really deals with energy in the broadest sense. Maybe it should have been called Re-Energizing EU, but maybe that was less snappy, so we chose the more snappy REPower. But for us in the Commission, rest assured, we know that heating is absolutely critical, and especially if we're talking about reducing dependence on gas, where so much gas goes into heating. So we know that very, very well. Guillermo, you talked about the false hopes, that people think that maybe gas prices will come back to normal, everything will be like it was before. I think in the Commission we do not believe that. We think gas prices will come down somewhat, but it will not be the level before. And that's not really what matters so much, because we're dealing with other really important challenges like climate change and security of supply. And those are challenges that are not going to go away, irrespective of what happens on international energy markets. And I think what we've seen in the last few days in the Baltic Sea with the what looks as if it is a tax on energy infrastructure has to make us think again. We need to really move forward also on local solutions to not make Europe more vulnerable when it comes to our energy supply and our energy infrastructure. So for me, it has been really a pleasure listening to all of you, also to the questions, also those on Slido. I think were very good questions. So I take a lot away from here. I hope the audience as well. Thank you.
Thank you, and that we're a bit over time, but let me, invite every one of you to thank our audience here, for our panelists, sorry, for the great discussion today.